Welcome to the Polgar Chess University. In this lesson, I'd like to share with you some very interesting examples and fun positions. And the main theme of the lesson is the in-between moves. Here we go. Here is the first position, which is a very typical position out of a Queen's Gambit exchange variation. And a common theme in such situations is for black trying to go after the white bishop that's on g3 and trade the knight for it. However, there is an important pattern that can happen in such situations. Namely, as you can see, the black queen is surrounded by all of his own pieces, except, of course, for this diagonal. And this allows white a very cute combination, but there is a little bit more to it than it seems at first. Namely, that white can capture the black pawn on d5. Now, white, of course, threatens to trap the queen with bishop c7. And the point is, even if now the black pawn captures the knight on d5, bishop will go to c7, trapping the queen. However, the real question is, what would happen if instead, in this position, black captures the bishop first? The idea is simple. If white now recaptures with either of the pawns, then after pawn takes knight, white no longer has a bishop to use to trap the black queen. And therefore, white would remain without his knight, and the combination would not work. But this is when it's so important to think of the intermediate moves. Don't just think of the obvious of recapturing. In this case, white is able to capture the black bishop on e7 with a check, which is very important, so black does not have the time to capture the rook on f1. Black needs to recapture either with queen or rook, and then already white can capture, and as the end result, white has won a pawn. One of the typical situations is when a more experienced, let's say a master player, plays against an A player, that the club player, the A player, let's say calculates a line, couple of moves ahead, and stops the calculation prematurely. And therefore, his evaluation of the variation is incorrect. The more experienced player or the master calculates just one extra move further, and that switches the result of the evaluation. Instead of black being ahead, white being ahead in the material count. Let's move on to a next example where we see similar scenarios. Here we go. This position is from a real game between one of the earlier versions of the software Fritz against Grandmaster Dautov. Black made a mistake right here by castling, in this case prematurely. Although normally speaking it's already too late, not premature, but in this case it results in immediate loss of material, and therefore it's a mistake. I suggest you try to think and figure out the elegant combination that white has at his disposal, or its disposal in this case, as Fritz had the white pieces. This is quite a pretty sacrifice by rook capturing the knight, and when knight captures back, the knight is on an unprotected square, and white plays queen d3, creating a double threat, checkmating on h7 and attacking the knight. Again, this is one of those situations when a typical club player, if he would have predicted the rook sacrifice, would think, but I'll move my knight back and everything is safe. My knight is out of danger. The knight protects the h7 pawn. Everything is good. And this is when a master player would outcalculate the less experienced player, or in this case you can see that even grandmasters fall into such traps time to time. Here white has an amazing move, namely opening the diagonal, and with the whole purpose of removing the guard, namely the knight on f6, from the protection of the h7 square, not so importantly the pawn, but of course that it results checkmate. Right now, if knight takes knight, white just checkmates immediately by queen takes pawn. And if either the bishop or the pawn captures the knight on d5, the white bishop captures on f6, again renewing the threat of queen takes h7. Therefore, black has no time to capture the bishop on f6. And after g6, bishop takes bishop, white won material, having now a bishop and a knight extra for black's extra rook. While it's true that is only one extra point, however, the weakness of the dark squares around the black king, such as f6, g7, h6, is very, very unpleasant, as the white bishop will retreat to f6 soon and will try to get the queen to h6. And that would result with a very serious checkmate threat on g7. In the actual game, after castling and the rook sacrifice, knight takes, queen d3, black responded with g6, but the result was somewhat similar. White got two pieces, two knights against a rook. This is still clearly better for black compared to the previous line. Nevertheless, white's advantage is quite clear. And now I'd like to share with you a very fascinating position. In this position, that has arisen just after 11 moves, it's white's turn. And a student of mine has played this recently in a tournament. I suggest you take your time and figure out what you would do if you're playing white. White in this position should look clearly for tactics. How do we know that? If I'm not there to tell you during the game, and even if I'm there obviously, I could not tell you that. So what hints does the position itself give you? Well, there are several red flags, so to say. We can see that white is fully developed. The bishops, the knights are all active, even though the white rook didn't really move other than castling. Because of the f-pawn not being there, it's already very active and pressuring the black f7 pawn, and if that wouldn't be there, of course, the f8 square would be a very attractive square for the rook. We can also see that black is very much behind development. We can see that the queen side didn't move yet. And what also looks quite ugly, that the black rook is still in the corner. And considering that the black king is on g8, that's certainly not a good thing. It's almost like black made half a castling, but that's of course not the case. The black king made two moves to f8 and g8, and black is not allowed to castle anymore in this game. In addition to all of that, the black queen right now is in an unprotected square and also in a semi-pin situation. That means if the white knight would move, the black knight would be in a pin. So black has a lot of different problems, and white has a clear lead in development. In situations like this, typically you'd want to look for concrete transformation of your nice position, of your strategical advantage, to convert it to either material advantage or to a checkmate situation. White's first move indeed fits in nicely to that theme that you'd want to look for forceful moves. And the first move, the correct one, is knight takes knight. Now if the black does not recapture with the queen, but let's say captures bishop takes knight, then queen takes back, and white already has won a bishop. In addition, white now is threatening to checkmate, and if black would defend against that, the knight could jump again, create a discovery to win the black queen. Let's go back to the position after knight takes, because black of course captured back with the queen. Now after this exchange on d5, the black queen ends up being again on an unprotected square. And another issue that black needs to face in some variations is the back rank problem. In this position, white has a brilliant move to make to win the game. Try to figure it out first on your own before you listen further. Here white needs to combine several threats. In addition to a possible discovery and the back rank problem, also because the white bishop is on h6 and the black king on g8 and the rook in the corner, meaning that the black king has no moves at this very moment, you could foresee a potential checkmate if a white knight could get to e7. Well, that almost gives it away already, because the move is knight f5. Indeed, a brilliant move, putting the knight into an attack. Obviously, if black would capture the knight, the black queen would fall, and if black would want to trade queens first and then capture the knight, they would never get to that after part, because after queen takes queen, knight e7 gives a brilliant checkmate. Therefore, black's best hope is to give a check on c5. And at this point, in a famous game played long time ago by a Russian master Nesmedzinov, he made the correct move and blocked the check with the bishop. Now the black queen is under attack. If it would capture the bishop on b5, the checkmate would arrive indeed on the back rank. Or if the queen moves to a square where it guards the d8 square, then the checkmate comes from a different side, knight h6, followed by rook f7 checkmate. Beautiful harmony of the white pieces all attacking together. However, it's interesting to go back for a moment and see what happened in the game of my student, where she moved her king instead of blocking the check. One of the typical examples when you get a check, don't automatically assume you need to move out of it. There are a good number of situations where you may block the check, or in some cases capture the piece that gave the check, and it tends to be the better move. Well, now the story is that white is still threatening the black rank checkmate on d8, and for example, if black would make a natural move such as knight c6, protecting that square, white would simply remove the guard in the knight, and again would renew that very threat. Black in the game retreated the queen to c7. Although this is a mistake. The correct move was still, even though it seemed that white wins after bishop takes knight, because now black can capture also the white knight on f5, and now the rook guards the back rank. This was still the much better choice than what was played in the game, retreating the queen. It seems that white's attack is very strong here, and it is true, but white needs to find a crucial move. In the game, white made a mistake by playing queen d5, and then bishop captured the knight, and even though white tried hard to still make the attack work, but it just was not quite enough steam to make it happen. A brilliant move that was analyzed after the game was over was moving the queen to d7, which is a really impressive move, putting the queen into triple attack. And indeed, if black would capture it with either the bishop or the knight, the checkmate would come with knight takes pawn. The problem is that black can survive here by capturing with the queen, and then after bishop captures, developing the knight to c6, protecting the e7 pawn, and then after bishop c6, bishop f5. And black is up a pawn. So let's go back again to the beginning. After knight d5, queen d5, knight f5, queen c5 check, we already learned the correct move is coming back with the bishop to e3 and then knight h6 and checkmate. But what happened after king h1, queen c7, which was a mistake? Here, the same idea can be used in a less brilliant way. Not the queen, but the bishop is actually the winning move. Now white has the same checkmate threat. If the pawn takes, the rook takes back, and the opening of the g-file makes black's position pretty hopeless. Capturing the bishop with the queen only delays the end after queen takes queen and then knight takes pawn checkmate. And if black tries to use a similar method of defense with knight c6, then white continues with the combinations knight e7, knight e7, and now rook f7 quite brilliantly. King takes, and queen f3 check. And now the beautiful idea is that after the bishop blocks or the king moves to g8, the white queen appears on the other side, checkmating the black king. Or if knight blocks, then the queen can just simply go to d5, king e7, queen e6, and bishop g5, checkmating within a couple of moves. This example shows how beautiful a chess game can really be, how many tactics there can be, and even in games that seemingly nothing much happens, there are missed opportunities, there are actual jewels. Let's see our next example, where the question is, what should black do after bishop takes bishop on f5? Well, this is more of a strategical situation here, because obviously black could recapture with the queen or the pawn, but both would result in a situation that would end up ruining black's pawn structure on the king's side. You can see certainly a pawn structure like this is not very attractive for black. And it's a perfect example how you shouldn't automatically respond on any move. Here black had a wonderful intermediate move at his disposal, namely capturing the white knight on c3. The reason why this is possible is that if the bishop takes the black queen, black would checkmate with rook e1. On the other hand, if white recaptures on c3, then black no longer is forced to ruin his pawn structure and can simply take back with the queen, threatening checkmate on his own right on b1, and also in some situations to play g5 and maybe trap the bishop on h6. Going back to the starting position, therefore, white was better off to retreat his bishop simply first to e3, closing off any kind of threats on e1, making sure the white bishop does not get trapped on h6 after black would play g5, and then white would maintain a small advantage. Let's move on to a fascinating pawn endgame. In this position, black is a pawn ahead. However, white has a far advanced passed pawn on c7 already. True, it's being blocked by black's king, but white also has an additional passed pawn on the a file. As we know, a king cannot hold off two passed pawns that both are on the 7th rank. The problem is that black's passed pawn on the h file is further advanced than white's on the a file. So therefore, the big question is, how can white win, considering that if white simply keeps pushing and black keeps pushing, it is actually black who arrives first, and after pawn promotes, queen takes, white simply lost his newly born queen. This is a typical example where you do want to make an intermediate move. You want to make sure that after black promotes his pawn, it will not control the crucial a8 square. Therefore, the move is d5. If now black ignores white's move and advances the pawn, then white just takes and promotes the pawn on the e file, and then can freely promote a second pawn to a queen on the c file. But what happens after e5 if black takes? Well, white achieved his goal, because now pawn push, and after a7, h1, the black queen no longer controls the corner a8 square, and therefore pawn promotion ends the game by checkmate. And as I mentioned, a king cannot stop when there are two pawns on the 7th rank, for various reasons in this case, but either pawn can actually promote. The better one here is to promote the c pawn, and if king takes, the second pawn arrives not only with a check, but indeed with a checkmate. A very elegant and beautiful example from an actual game between Grandmaster Stoll and Hort. And finally, let's see the jewel of the week. Here we go. In this position, we'll see a good number of motifs, from using a pin to deflection and a beautiful checkmate. I suggest you try to figure out the sequence of moves. White to move. First, white is using a pin and creating a skewer by playing rook e5, attacking the black queen. Obviously the knight is pinned, therefore cannot capture the rook. The black queen needs to find a square where it protects the rook on e8 and therefore retreats to d7. White responds by trading rooks, and then another forceful move to advance the pawn. The pawn is about to get promoted, therefore it must be captured. And the purpose actually was to open up the diagonal of the queen. It wasn't just a pawn sacrifice for no reason. The queen really wanted to get in there with a tempo, with a check, not giving black any other option other than giving the queen up, of course, but moving the king to h8. And now comes the brilliant idea of opening the g file by giving the queen up. check, followed by rook g7. I hope you enjoy this elegant example of the chess jewels, and of course all the other examples we saw on intermediate moves or in-between moves. Thank you for listening to this lesson number 40 in our series. Take care and be back next week for more chess ideas.